For the past few years, I've been working 2 jobs and typically leave my house around 6 in the morning and don't get home until 10 at night. Then I sleep, and on most days I repeat that same schedule. Unfortunately, that's just the situation I've been in for a while, but this happened just a couple months ago. I'd come home one night and did what I usually do, which is shower and get ready for bed. But while I was in the shower, I heard some movement that sounded like it was just outside the bathroom door. I quickly got out and checked and saw nothing, so I figured it just had to be the house creaking or something. I finished cleaning up and got in bed. All throughout the night, I kept hearing these odd noises coming from all throughout the house. Mostly just some sort of creaking, kind of like if it was really windy outside and making the house sway. But there was no wind and no reason for the house to be making any noise. At one point in the middle of the night, I even got up and walked around to try and find out what it was, but I found nothing. In the morning, I was very tired and had to work the whole day relying on coffee to keep me awake. By the time I got home, I was exhausted and sleepy, really hoping for a good night's sleep. I went right upstairs and turned the shower on, but before I even got in, I heard something outside the bathroom door again. This time I was sure it was right outside the door, and it sounded like it passed right by and left the bedroom. Although as unlikely as it was, it really sounded like something had moved across my room. I knew I had to look to see if someone was there, but I was feeling really uneasy. When I did finally get the courage to look, I didn't see anything. I walked through the whole house and did a quick look around each room, but I was convinced it had to be something odd going on inside the walls or under the floorboards. I showered and got in bed, falling asleep just before midnight. The instant I woke up, I knew something was wrong. It was very dark, so it was still well into the night, and the entire house was silent. I wasn't sure what had woken me up, but I could feel that it had something to do with the sounds I'd been hearing. I peered over at the door and saw the slightest movement of a shadow from under the crack. I jolted up and stared across the room. My heart immediately started racing as I saw the shadow move away from the door and heard them begin walking down the upstairs hallway. I was horrified and frozen in fear, but it must have been the surge of adrenaline that got me out of my bed and made me swing open the door. I looked out, and standing at the end of the hallway was the dark outline of a man. His eyes were the only thing that really stood out to me. They pierced through me with a sense of anger and restlessness. I slammed my bedroom door shut and locked it. The man's footsteps immediately went down the stairs, but it took another 30 seconds before I heard him leave the house. I got the police to come as soon as possible, but they didn't have much luck. They found a few signs of the man being in my house for at least a few days, but that was about it. I don't know where he was hiding, but I always think back to when I'd hear him walk past the bathroom door. Maybe he was sleeping in my bed, then quickly would hide in the closet until I got in the shower, where he would take the opportunity to leave the room. I also wonder why he spent that extra time downstairs before leaving the house when he knew I'd seen him and had likely called the police. Everything is just speculation at this point, but knowing that some random man was hiding in my house while I was sleeping is a horrifying thing to think about. As far as I know, the man hasn't come back, and there have been no updates on his identity. Last year I moved into a new house far from the city. My new job was work from home, so I had no reason to be in a clustered and expensive city anymore. For the first couple months, I was enjoying everything about the place, especially it being so far from other people. But on a regular weekday afternoon, I got a knock at my door. This was actually the first time anyone had come up to my door at this place since I moved in, so it caught me a little off guard. I went up and opened the door to a tall middle-aged man.
How can I help you?
I smiled to be friendly, thinking he was probably a neighbor from down the street. But strangely, the first thing he did was lean to the side and look past me into my house. It was like he was trying to see who else was home. Being weirded out by his behavior, I pulled the door in and blocked the way with my body. Before saying anything, the man turned and walked away from the door. I stayed and watched him go all the way down the driveway and continue walking until he got to the street, where he got into a parked car and drove off. Without a doubt, that was the strangest encounter I'd ever had with someone up until that point, and I really had no idea how to even think about it. That night, I stayed home for dinner just to make sure the man didn't come back. I debated calling the police to put in a report, but I thought I'd sound stupid for doing that just because some man came up to my door and did nothing. Around 9 p.m., I turned on the TV and tried to get myself more relaxed before trying to sleep. While I was on the couch though, I heard a voice speaking outside. I quickly muted the TV and listened. It was muffled, but I could make out at least 2 separate people talking somewhere in the back of my yard. I ran up to the back window and opened up the blinds. In the distance, I could see 2 figures walking across my backyard. One of them had a long tool or object in his hand, but the other one was too hard to see clearly. They walked between the trees in my yard until they reached the side of my house. I went over to the side window and tried to see where they went, but I lost track of them and they had stopped talking. I checked every window and still couldn't see or hear them anymore. The loud knocking at my front door made me jump and sent chills through my body. I walked up, trying not to make any noise, and looked through the peephole. There was one man dressed in dark clothing and wearing a hat that covered his eyes. He had to be one of the men I'd just seen, but where was the other? "What do you want?" I yelled, figuring they likely already knew I was home, or maybe I'd scare them away. The man stayed on the doorstep and looked over at the side of my house, then looked back at the door. After a few seconds, the lack of response started to terrify me. I went back to the living room to get my phone and call the police, but was interrupted by a loud smashing sound, followed by another and another. I looked across the hall and saw a man hitting a shovel against the back door. He saw me and looked at me for a second, then ran away. I was so scared, I hesitated on whether to call the police or try to find somewhere to hide. The best answer was obviously to do both, but my thoughts were interrupted again when I heard the side window getting hit. I got my phone and dialed 911 while the man continued to hit the window over and over. But just as the police picked up the phone, everything went quiet. And it stayed quiet until the police came. When they pulled in, I was surprised by a sudden commotion outside. It turned out to be the man at the door who had chosen not to leave, and after a closer look, it was the same man who'd come by earlier that day. Strangely, when the police detained him, he refused to say anything about the other man that was with him. He denied everything over and over, even though there were clear cracks and dents in the doors and windows. It was frustrating to listen to, and even weeks later, the man still refused to detail why he had come by my house twice that day, or who the other man was. Everything remains so unanswered that it still creeps me out to this day. Why was the man trying to break in so bad? And what purpose did the man at my doorstep serve to aid in the break-in? I moved away in the following months and have since only been hoping that it wasn't me they were after, or are still after. I was using Craigslist to sell an office chair that I no longer wanted. It wasn't broken or damaged and was barely even used, but I just didn't need it anymore. It took a few days, but eventually I got a message from a man who was interested in buying the chair. We had a short phone call, and he seemed like any other nice guy. He was willing to pay my asking price too, so everything seemed perfect. We set to meet at a local Walmart parking lot, which I opted for to keep it in a public setting. Come Friday afternoon, I called the man and let him know I was on my way. Then I drove down to the Walmart and got there right on time. He said he drove a gray Honda Civic, which I realized was very generic and basically useless information. He knew which car I drove too, so I was hoping he'd see me at least and come over. But time ticked away, and there was no sign of him. I sent a text, and a few minutes later I called, but now he wasn't picking up. I stayed in the lot for nearly an hour, waiting for him to show, but as the sun was going down, I decided to just go home. For most of the drive, I was just annoyed and upset that I'd had to waste my time for absolutely no reason. But about halfway back, I realized that a car had been behind me for a while. I got nervous about it, but once I pulled into my street, they turned away. After going inside and tossing my phone and stuff on the counter, I went back out to bring the chair inside. As I walked down my driveway, a car pulled up along the road and parked right in front of my house. I couldn't tell for sure, but it looked very similar to the car that was behind me earlier. It was a dark red sedan, looking to be at least 15 years old with rust all around it. I quickly got my chair out of my car and went inside, closing the garage and locking all the doors. I peeked out the windows and watched as the car just sat right in front of my house, still running and everything. I checked my phone to see if the man had ever responded, and he still hadn't, and that's when it all really started making me nervous. After another minute, I heard a car door open and close. I looked out the window again and saw a figure in dark clothing standing beside the car, but he was facing the house as if he was inspecting it. Once I saw that, I closed the blinds and dialed 911, explaining to the operator that a creepy man was outside my house and that I think he followed me home. They sent an officer on their way, and I thanked them, then hung up. I pushed the blind up slightly and checked out the window one more time. His car was still there, but the man was gone. I could feel my heartbeat getting faster as I went around to each window and looked, but it wasn't until I got to my back door that I saw the man again. He was standing inside my fenced backyard and was looking up at my house. I didn't know what he was doing, but it was really creeping me out, and all I could think was that at any moment he was going to try to break in. After a second, the man started walking to the side of my house. I went back to the front window to see if he was going back to his car, but he didn't reappear. Then I went around to every window again, trying to find him, but a few minutes later, the police showed up. The car was still left outside my house, and the man was nowhere to be found. What's worse is that the car was completely empty, not having a single piece of paper or even a fingerprint anywhere inside or outside of it. It was apparently bought from a junkyard years ago, but that was the earliest record they had of it. The police were just as weirded out as I was, especially since the man just disappeared, leaving his car behind and showing no effort to break in. One thing we can say almost for certain is that it was likely the same man from Craigslist who had used an untraceable email and account and followed me from the Walmart parking lot to my house. It's been a couple months since all of this, but I still worry, because why else would he have taken the time to inspect my house on all sides if he wasn't planning on coming back any day now to finish whatever it was he came to do? When I was 21, I made the poor decision to move out of my parents' house before I could afford a place on my own. It was something I'd actually planned out for months, searching for cheap apartments, roommates, and anything that could help me move out. For some reason, I just prioritized moving out on my own over everything else. After months of searching, I found a post on Facebook about a room for rent in my area. It was a 2-bedroom house, and the owner was renting out the 2nd bedroom. I sent him a message on Facebook and got a reply in minutes. He asked a couple of questions, then sent over a document. It looked like a huge list of rules for moving in, all simple stuff that's pretty much common sense. After agreeing to all the rules, he let me come over to look at the room that same day. When I got there, I was very surprised at how clean and well put together the place was. It looked like it was a model house, so perfectly decorated and furnished. The owner, Terry, was a little bit weird though. He was in his late 20s, but his personality and looks didn't match the way the house looked. He was wearing a dirty t-shirt and just had a weird way of talking. Still, I was blinded by the possibility of moving out that I didn't even care. A week later, I packed up a rental van with my stuff and drove it down to the house. When I walked inside, I almost thought I'd walked into the wrong house. It was so empty, no decorations or furniture except for an old couch in the living room. It was a completely different looking place than the one I'd seen the first time. Terry was standing there and acted like nothing was different, talking my ear off about how excited he was to have a roommate. I asked about all the furniture and everything, but he basically ignored my question and just went straight to moving my stuff into the house. Being a little weirded out, I still moved in. Several weeks went by, and to be honest, I rarely even saw Terry. He was always working and didn't get home until late at night, but about a month in, I started realizing that Terry had stopped coming home most nights. It was maybe once a week I'd hear him get home around 2 or 3 a.m. He'd hang around downstairs for a while, then leave and wouldn't show up for another week or so. Part of me didn't care because I was happy to have the house to myself, but another part of me was curious about what he was up to. I mean, he wanted me to move in so bad, but now he's never here. Then one night at 2 a.m., weeks since I'd last seen Terry, I was woken up to him banging on my bedroom door and yelling my name. I got up and rushed over. Terry was standing in the doorway with sweat dripping from his head and a look of anger. "Do not leave your room," he said in a harsh voice, then grabbed the door and ripped the handle out of my hands, slamming it shut. I stood there in shock, listening to him walk downstairs. I opened the door quietly, and after a few seconds, I heard the sound of him dragging something heavy across the floor and into the garage. I ran downstairs to see what was going on. There was a smear of mud and dirt going across the kitchen and leading up to the garage door. I tried to open it, but he'd somehow locked it from inside. I realized it was best to just remove myself from the situation and ran out to my car, driving away while calling the cops. When they got to the house, Terry was already gone and the smears on the floor had been cleaned up. After some days of investigating, it turned out that Terry was actually renting the house from someone else, so I wasn't even allowed to have legally moved in, and all the documents he sent me and had me sign were fake. Terry likely wasn't his real name either, and as far as I know, he never showed back up after that. I don't know for sure what he was up to, but he was so adamant about me staying in my room that night, and with him vanishing afterward, he clearly had something horrible he was hiding. But what really confuses me is why he wanted me to move into the house and live with him so badly. I can't help but think that he had some sort of plans for me, and I barely got out of there without having to find out the hard way. Three years ago, I moved down a few states on the East Coast to a new city. Due to work and money, I couldn't make the trip to see the place before making the move, but I was only renting, so there wasn't too much risk in it. It was mid-September when the movers came and loaded everything up, then dropped it off at the house. The landlord was nice enough to let the movers in for me to unload, because I wasn't actually arriving there until the following week. It was a Monday evening when I finally arrived and saw the house in person for the first time. It was a mess, with boxes everywhere and furniture laying all around, but the house itself was alright. The layout was interesting in that it was very separated. It was a single story with the kitchen and living room on one side of the house, then on the other side was a long hallway with all the bedrooms and bathrooms. Since it was already late, I went to the master bedroom and started working on getting the bed put together, then shut off all the lights and went to sleep. I didn't have a clock set up yet, so I don't know what time it was, but in the middle of the night, I woke up to an odd sound. I thought it was a noise the house was making, but I wanted to see what it was, and if it was something I needed to let the landlord know about. I got up and walked over to the bedroom door. As I got closer though, I realized it was coming from somewhere down the hallway. I opened the door, and it stopped almost instantly. The hallway was pitch black, so I flicked on the light, but nothing was there. I slowly walked down and peered into the living room. It looked the same as it had earlier, but I turned on the lights and looked around just to be sure. On the floor, there were a lot of footprints scattered between the boxes that were laying around. I knew it was likely from the movers, and with no other signs of anything, I went back to the bedroom. It took a while for me to fall asleep again because I kept thinking about how the sound stopped as soon as I opened the door. I tried to come up with any possible way this could be the house making noises, but nothing came to mind. When I drifted back asleep, it felt like I only stayed asleep for a minute before I was woken up by a sudden thump, followed by footsteps running down the hallway. My eyes shot open and I looked over at my bedroom door. The door was wide open, and on the ground were clear footprints coming right up to my bed. I got up and hurried to see who was there, but by then, they were long gone. All that was left were scuffed prints from them running away. I got my phone and called the police, locking myself in the bathroom until they arrived. When they did, they oddly found no signs of a break-in aside from the footprints. I convinced myself that they must have gained access during the week before I arrived at the house, but something still didn't sit right with me. After unpacking and checking each box, nothing seemed to be missing. It obviously makes me wonder what they were even doing in the house, but the biggest mystery is why did they walk up to my bed, and what was that thump sound that I heard just before they ran away? The landlord was eager to allow me to break the contract and move out, so long as I didn't say anything about the break-in publicly. At the time, it sounded like he just didn't want anyone to be scared away from the house so that he wouldn't miss out on his rental income, but now I'm not so sure. This happened a couple years back when I was 26. My single mother had just passed away, and being the only child, their house was left for me to either sell or move into. I was living in a really nasty apartment because I couldn't afford much back then, and after much deliberation, I decided to move into the house. It was already paid off, so I was saving a considerable amount of money by moving in. My goal was to hopefully save up for a few years and get back on my feet, then sell it and buy the house that I wanted. Once my lease was up at the apartment, I moved across town to the house. It was part of a community of farmland owners, but in the recent years, most of that land had stopped being used for farming and was left as just empty fields. That's what happened with my mom's land as well. It was pretty much just an old barn-style home in the middle of a huge field with only a small overgrown path leading to it. In the first week living there, I spent most of my time cleaning and getting all of my stuff where I wanted it. During one of these nights, while I was cleaning, I heard a car coming toward the house. I looked out the window and saw an old pickup truck driving down the overgrown path. It was very strange, being that the only reason for them driving here would be if they were coming to the house. But just as they approached the end of the path, they slowed to a stop. I could make out a male figure in the driver's seat, but couldn't make out any specifics. They stayed there for a moment with their headlights shining over the field before they did a 3-point turn and drove away. I thought they probably just typed in the wrong address or something, but it was kind of creepy to see someone coming all the way out here so late in the night. A few days went by, and by then I'd finished getting the house cleaned up and organized. It was a Sunday night, and I was staying up late watching TV and eating a home-cooked meal when a familiar sound came up in the distance. A car driving toward the house. I looked out the window again and saw that same pickup truck coming down the path, this time with all its headlights off. Knowing it couldn't possibly be an accident this time, I was more worried. I quickly looked at my phone and saw it was nearly 1 a.m., so why would anyone be coming here? The truck came all the way to the front of the house and parked. Then a man got out and started walking up to the porch. I waited anxiously, but after a minute, there was no doorbell or knocking. I cautiously went up to the front door and looked out the peephole. A man was standing right on the porch, looking directly at the door. I was terrified, as he looked like he was contemplating something. Then he turned around and went back to his truck, getting in and hurrying away. I was really creeped out, so I called the police and reported it, but there was nothing else to be done. I went to bed that night with a really bad feeling about everything. Apparently I was right, because I woke up to what I thought was the sound of a knock at the door. It was just a single knock. I got up right away and looked out the window, but the truck that I thought I'd see wasn't anywhere outside the house. I quietly left my bedroom to try and go downstairs and see who it was, but just as I reached the top of the steps, I could see that the front door was slightly open. I froze, and moments later, I heard footsteps walking through the hallway below me. I quickly hid in the spare bedroom that was next to me and dialed 911 as the footsteps grew louder and started coming up the stairs. They went straight into the main bedroom, and I could hear them moving stuff around like they were looking for something. I was too scared to speak to the officer on the phone, worried the intruder would hear me, so I just sat there silently. They spent a few minutes going through the bedroom before leaving and going back downstairs and finally exiting the house. I started talking to the officer as I ran up to the back window to see if I could identify them before they got away. It was dark, but I could see that it was the same man who was on my porch earlier. He was walking in the backyard toward the field of tall grass, eventually disappearing in it. Police came by and tried to find any evidence to help with the case, but my description of the man was about all there was that was helpful. I don't know what that man wanted, but he seemed to be looking for something specific. It makes me think maybe he knew of something my mother had, and after hearing of her passing, he wanted to steal it. But once I realized he had to have known I was home and probably in the bedroom, it terrified me to think about how he still went in and looked around. What was he planning to do to me if I was still in there? I ended up selling the house a month later because I was too scared of him coming back. Even now, I still check every few months to see if there were any reports of recent break-ins at that address, but it's been quiet ever since that night.